And we are live. So, welcome everybody to the 10th episode. It's kind of scary to think that this is now the 10th episode. We have more than 12 hours worth of material, I think far more than that. But this is the 10th episode of Like Clockwork, a podcast of Chicago filmmakers. One of my favorite things that I get to do here at Chicago Filmmakers, in part because I get to bring together amazing folks from around the world and Chicago in order to have conversations that you don't really get to have, except for instance, after a film screening, or maybe at an art gallery, or maybe when you're around a lot of other artists or people who are really interested in film, all of its tangents. So it's an amazing way to kind of bring us into the summer, hopefully, or spring, summer, to have a podcast today that's oriented around people with whom I've been able to make community for years, and who I've really relied on, even if it's just as being allies, holding down different parts of film communities and film scenes around the world. Speaking of one, too, I just have to say, Chicago Filmmakers is going through a lot of different changes, and so we have been adding, for instance, the Queer Writers Club, which will take place tomorrow at 2 p.m. And that's a free event. If you haven't signed up already, go to chicagofilmmakers.org immediately. Do so. And we also have a number of screenings to announce soon, including, this is a like leak information, June, to celebrate Pride Month. We are going to be pairing with Mubi in order to have a number of Pride related screenings. There's more details to come, but that's a little sneak peek into our future programming. So I am going to bring our guests into view. Hello, hello, everybody. And I'm going to go around, oh, this way, go around in the clockwork, in order to be able to introduce each one of our guests. Bryn, would you introduce yourself first?
Hi, my name is Bryn Jackson. My pronouns are he, him, and I am an artist and curator, currently based in Indianapolis, although I have lived in and worked in New York and Chicago and Oaxaca as well.
Thank you very much. Hanxuan?
Hi, I'm Hanxuan Jiang, and you guys can also call me Sophie. Basically, I'm a independent artist and filmmaker right now, and based in Shanghai, and also am a art tutor in kind of a university. Yeah, just being like recently. So I quite enjoy the shooting. So basically, I really like what Jonas Makers once said. I love film, therefore I live, therefore film. I film, therefore I live. And it's also like being kind of appreciate quarter for me. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And Stefano?
Hi, my name is Stefano Miraglia. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an artist, filmmaker, and curator, Italian and Spanish, and I'm based in Paris.
All right, I'm not going to take up very much more time before I bring Bryn in. Just to say that I am extraordinarily excited to hear what everybody has to say. Once again, I do not know what everyone's going to be talking about. We all don't know what each other are going to be talking about. But then once we hear a little bit from each one of our members of the round table, we'll chop it up afterwards. And so I'm going to pass that over to you, Bryn.
Thanks, Sam. So I came today to talk a little bit about portability. This is definitely something that has informed my practice really for as long as I've been sort of comfortable owning my abilities as an artist. I moved to New York when I was 18. This was in 2006. And actually came to know M, I think it must have been like 2008, 2009, in Daryl Wilson's experimental film class. But before that, I had the opportunity to work with this incredible professor named Chitra Niyogi, whose guidance still informs a lot of how I operate to this day. And I don't remember exactly what the circumstances were at the time, but at NYU they used to make us compete for resources, and so only a certain number of students in each class would be afforded the ability to actually make a film. And I remember, and again, I don't remember the circumstances, but I do remember that for whatever reason, the entire class was told that we would not be receiving allotments that year to compete for. And so, and I don't remember, what exactly was the cause of this, but it seemed like some sort of administrative issue. And for obvious reasons, I really wasn't satisfied with this. And so, I was really determined. I came all the way here to make something. I was going to do exactly that. And so I just figured that I would make something using the tools that I had immediately available to me. And at the time, the the device that I had on hand was a Motorola Razr. And it was secondhand, but at the time of its production, it was sort of the apotheosis of portability. But its video capabilities were just absolute crap. It shot something like 6 frames per second, and the video files that it produced were literally just an inch. But that's what I had, and so that's what I used. And that is what was evaluated as a result of that. And from that moment forward, I had really just sort of promised myself that I would continue making no matter what the circumstances, and that I would do so using whatever tools I had on hand. And a lot of what goes into film production is fairly inaccessible to most people, either in terms of the processes, the equipment, and even at times just like even the ability to collaborate. And so I really just invested the few dollars I was making through their work study program into just very, very portable equipment. I had a flip camera at one point. I had a portable DVD camera at one point. Keeping in mind that even at the time, video was itself not as portable as it is now. And I think that portability is something that we now take for granted because it's so commonplace. It's pretty banal. But at the time that I was shooting with the Motorola Razr, the video files were not actually compatible with any of the editing equipment that we were using. And even to get them off the phone, I essentially had to break the phone in some ways. And this pretty much continued until sort of right before the iPhone, I feel like. The flip camera, was a USB device. So that made that opened up a whole other set of possibilities for me. And at the time, I really wasn't making films per se or cinema. I was really just sort of going into nature, doing these sort of compositional studies of the movement of natural forms such as leaves and water and things like that. And then I would use every effect possible to push the image into just complete abstraction. It was all very colorful, lots of flashing, lots of just sort of abstract, almost glitchy strangeness, although I don't necessarily classify it as glitch, because really I was using all of these technologies within their parameters, just not with the same intention. But as time went on, lots of things started becoming more and more portable. These sort of dedicated devices eventually would become combined into, these singular phones that we carry around now. And with that, everything sort of became more portable. Not even just the files themselves, but also the ability to produce a thing became very portable. Information became much more portable, particularly as these devices gave us the ability to connect with one another. And I think, with where we are, particularly in social media, and I know this has been talked about a few times on this podcast, but particularly with social media, um, I think for better or worse, it sort of led to a kind of portability of oneself. And yeah, so that's what I came here to talk about today.
Oh man. Well, we got a good discussion going to happen afterwards. So thank you very much, Bryn. And Sophie, you're on.
Yeah, I actually have some other like topics, but after talking about the portability, I also have a lot want to say, so maybe we can come up later. Basically, I think my main concerns recent years is about like how to understand others by shooting and how to value private life through filmmaking, and how can we define the others. So basically, in my works, I focus on the emotional connections between individuals and micro communities, and boundaries of common and different identities, culture, practice in a international like context. So I investigate the role of the dialogue in social interactions and interpersonal relationship, such as the those between very close friends, kind of. So it's not just the intimacy between um, man woman, but also all kinds of subtle relationships, and also even the temporary residents, or even strangers. So basically, a large number of everyday conversations coming from my life cover a wide range of, not just about the life itself, but also including art, sociology, and anthropology, but not in a very, delicate uh, language. But as an engaged observer, I experience and deeply investigate people's behavior and exchange, and also their kind of the differences between the communications and the behavior. So, and exploring the multi-layered boundaries that generate various emotions, also the improvisational shooting is the way that I start to open a dialogue with others, reshape. Um, so I hope to reshape like our uh, interpersonal relationships. So in my day life, I always bring my camera, and I really frequently shoot, and why I won't give lens to my close friends, because we have a lot of trust, and they are super comfortable about what I gonna shoot, and they can also shoot me. So there are no observer and the observed, in kind of process of shooting. So we're totally equal, and people or other kinds of the small group can also get involved in. um and why I'm so interested in um understand others, because I think living in a society that continuously tends towards homogeneity, and others are disappearing, and the nearby is become irrelevant. And I really agree with what a Chinese philosopher called Zhao Tingyang, and he was said, there is no higher place to go within. For human beings, there is nothing higher than real life and true happiness. And for mankind, there is nothing higher than its own destiny. So for me, for my personal life, I think shooting itself can give me a true happiness, and I really um, cherish the sincere moments and the super trust between um uh, uh a small groups, because what I can achieved and what I can observed is from my personal life. So that's why I start to shoot um by my surroundings. And also I think um it's quite important to you know um um to bring up, which is about the perspective between the outsider and insider. Because sometimes when I, travel to other places, or being a residency artist, or just being an international student, like was an international student, so there are, I can feel a lot of complicated perspectives from others, and they this all feelings are quite subtle. So I want um, be engaged in this kind of um, um, how can I say, subtle change of the relations and emotions or emotional connections, but within the everyday living context. And I also believe, even you are talking about your own personal stuff, but the audience, the potential audience, part of the potential audience can still, you know, um, f- can still feeling part of it, because um, they can't know our own personal experience, but they can still feel the common pain, happiness, and struggles. So that's why I want bring up this kind of small topic today. Yeah.
That was absolutely amazing. Thank you. I mean, I didn't expect less of this group. So to top, like, this is going to be really difficult for me to um, do a good job of putting together. But at the same time, I don't think that that's a small topic at all. That's quite amazing. All right, and here we are. All right, Stefano, I will turn the microphone over to you now.
Thanks. I would like to talk about community, cooperative work, and archive, and see where this can lead me and lead us. So I started in Paris in Collective Jean Cinema a few years ago, in around 2019, after having two of my films screened at their festival. Basically, Collective Jean Cinema is a filmmakers cooperative that was founded in 1971, and they also have, it's been now 25 years that they run a festival of experimental films and different films and marginalized films, and I had, like you, Michael, I've had my film screened there at the festival, and then in 2019, while I was living in Rome, the Collective Jean Cinema approached me to enter the association and the cooperative, and to enter my films in the distribution catalog. And this was important to me because when I went there for the festival, I kind of found something that I was looking for in France, which was some sort of community or uh, people where one could, feel at home somehow. And so when in 2019, I got into Collective Jean Cinema officially. I I had the chance um, to meet filmmakers and exchange with them, not only about cinema, and it was really important to me. Uh, but I want to tell you about one specific episode, which is something that is still really going on. So basically, Theo Delianis, which at the time was the administrator, and he's a brilliant filmmaker, contacted me one day in 2019 saying, look, we have this Italian film that was made probably in 1975. It's been here in the catalog, in the collection, since the 70s. It's a 60 millimeter print. We don't have a contract. It's been here forever, and we're going to screen it in Paris, but we don't know where the filmmaker is. Can you find him? And this was the first time I had to do something like that. So I started looking for this guy, with the help of another person, which I didn't knew really at the time, but this project brought us together as friends, which is Cecilia Ermini. She's a journalist in Italy and a film programmer. So in the end, we found the guy. He's called Ellis Donda, and this led to screening the film also in Italy, and I got somehow positively stuck with this guy's work, because I realized when I had the chance to meet him in person, I realized that his work was lost. Basically, apart from one print that we had, all the rest of his filmography was lost. He didn't have roughly almost anything at home. And I started looking for the rest of his filmography and reassembling everything. And it's a thing that I'm still doing. And last month I was in Italy, and I finally retrieved his second film that he shot on 16 millimeter, which was which was produced by the Venice Biennale, when the Venice Biennale at some point tried to do stuff also outside Venice, pedagogical projects and alternative projects in the region and not just in Venice for the Biennale. And so in the end, I don't know what I'm talking, where I want to, where I'm going with this, but basically, from a couple of screenings at the festival, I ended up working in some sort of weird family of filmmakers, and meeting also Michael, and working also on my first archival project, which is working on Ellis Donda's films, and ending up with a friend who has been a filmmaker and somehow a marginalized artist and intellectual, and which is something that is important, to acknowledge that filmmakers can be very quickly marginalized, and the work that we do can be lost and forgotten. So here's my story, community and archive.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. All right. I'm going to bring the group together. And this is the part where I see if my brain was working. And I'm looking at all the notes that I've been jotting down too as you've been speaking. And there's so much there. I mean, on one end, we could also speak to this idea of improvisational shooting. It pops out because as Sophie was going, what essentially binds like all of us in some form of the practice is in the way that we communicate through the capture recording device, whether it be for the purposes of a recording, or if it's rather a sort of way in which we're exploring a particular type of space identity, the person's within the volume of the space that we're capturing, or if, like, for instance, that I see in Sophie's work, there's a sense of performance with that camera, and that the camera is simply one like perspective, as a form of documentation of a thing that existed as an event while it was an event occurring around a camera, or with the camera as an object, a perceiving object within that given space. There's something also too here about the idea of portability and the idea of what it is to have the analog experience at the same time. I'm also very much aware of this issue of the archive, right? The fact that we have thousands, millions of films that are in peril for their original physical state. No matter what we do, in the end, we can't slow, or we can slow, but we can't completely evade the course of the decay that will occur upon that history. And then there's also the added aspect that we were speaking of before, of the lack of resources, both that's pulled into account from what Bryn was speaking about, and the story about NYU. But it's also thinking about too the way in which filmmakers become marginalized. They lose the resources they may have once had. The way that also co-ops, even those who are like Collective Shown Cinema, which is like one of the greatest places in the world, are also still responsible for the maintenance of a archive that is ever growing and also tedious. With what money, with what funding, is also in question. I remember thinking about what you were talking about, Bryn, the times where I would have to like push over video from the cell phone with Bluetooth, and it'd be like a 3GP file. What the hell is this shit? And then trying to find something before MPEG Stream Clip existed to try to reconvert that so I could somehow put it into Final Cut. Those moments of using the broken, because the broken was something that you could at least make more broken some way, even if it's functional, it was functionally broken, and in the sense that the infrastructure was not there to really support it. I found that was the case with a lot of other digital apparatuses, because they were almost like made solely for the watching on the camera itself, or only like made to watch the camera and plug into a television. There's a way in which what you're talking about, the portability of data and how we take it for granted, it does both also compress the spaces that we enter. And so it becomes harder, especially given everything that's been happening in the past few years, but it becomes harder to exist within a dioramic space, even as opposed to within spaces of still compressed video or compressed screen. And I think of also the way in which, as you're talking about portability, like the portability of virtual reality as well. Although the apparatus itself is still too heavy in order to, say, like avoid the obstacle that the apparatus creates, that isn't as present in cinema. There's still the cinematic trance that's possible in the creation of 2D cinema within certain spaces, and given a certain a way of entering into a narrative experience or a diegetic experience. However, with the virtual reality apparatus, it is almost as though the portability would have to go inside of the body at a certain point, that portability cannot exist as an outside to that inside perception. I think I'll wrap up my first wonder about with your ideas, although I have a lot more, to think about what you were talking about, Sophie, when it comes to the inside and the outside. We've been talking about this a little bit on the podcast, but I think maybe as this podcast sometimes like becomes a one sampled section of like conversations that I'm having with a number of other artists, I'm thinking about how cinema is a medium that can only either fabricate completely or record from the outside. And so finding like ways into the inside is something that often requires avant-garde techniques, or as we would refer to, or experimental techniques, as it might be considered. But maybe it's like more likely techniques outside of the capture of a singular representation, or out of a more corporate form of representation. The use of improvisational camera, I think, is one way of going about it, and that's why like Maya Deren, I think, always jumps into my mind when I think about the way that we coordinate our work around the camera and the space that we inhabit. But at the same time, I think that there's this discrete space that can get opened up. And this is where I'll end it, really. I promise. This is the first time talking about it out in the open, making a movie in pre-production that I call Los Trece. And it has something to do with Chicago and this area, and maybe some other things that I'm not going to talk about because I can't talk about them, to be cryptic. But this idea of Los Trece is like the idea of creating like a conspiratorial narrative that is joined out of conversations like these, that interweave people's consciousness, and use an improvisational tactic, but at the same time to continue to purge us into a more elaborate, fantastical state of being, and doing so without necessarily spectacle. And the movie that comes to mind that's influencing this a lot is Out One by Jacques Rivette, and really thinking about what that means as a film. So with that being said, I'm going to ask a question of the group, and you don't have to answer it at all. But this impetus, let's say, to both have a portable form of expression that we can then critique upon. How does that create a despair between the very weighty or very large amount of information that we choose to place within these portable forms of expression?
Well, I think I don't know. I feel like there is a bit of a shift, right? Like I think I find it interesting that you have framed it as a kind of despair, right? And I definitely at times feel that. I think that there are certainly frustrations, particularly that our generation, the millennial generation, has experienced in terms of right being sort of afforded these very accessible forms of expression, while at the same time being called upon to adhere to this sort of like corporatized idea of what that expression is or should be, and almost it's almost to me sort of an extension of like postmodern marketing at the end of the day. And what I find to be particularly interesting about this particular discussion is that I am seeing a shift in terms of sort of what the millennial generation has been producing versus what Gen Z is now producing, what the content that they're putting out. The fact that we're seeing um, teenagers, early 20 somethings presenting, and I don't want to say that it's not compressed in some way or another, but like much more nuanced uh, projections of themselves. And I think a lot of that has to do with, the fact that, Gen Z, they are true digital natives, right? And that like they were, my niece she just turned 23 and she's never known a time without the internet. She had a smartphone since she was like 10, and so a lot of her life was in many ways sort of genuinely lived in this space. And so I think that there is sort of pushback, right, against what we had experienced in that space with these devices, with the sort of newly seized means of production. And I think that in some ways it is exciting to see um, the ways in which people are actually able to uh, convey a fuller sense of self and of their experience.
Yeah, I kind of feel like to some degree there's been this absurd puncturing of that within a mainstream, which I'll say a hot take, like this is probably a really hot take. When it comes to surrealism or the surrealists in general, and despite the fact that I think that we could have a deeper discussion about all of the different surrealists and their different philosophies, which were not represented by the manifestos of Breton or the folks who were, say, part of the organizational leadership, but rather the disparate forms of expression all considered, that there was a way that that movement, in the form of some of its figureheads, of course, punctured with a mainstream and poured into it a different sense of a even if it was a corporate representation, that corporate representation took on a caricature now being juxtaposed with the fabric of the unconscious or of the nightmare, even if it wasn't necessarily successful as an avant-garde. And in that sense too, what I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is a sort of puncturing that's definitely Gen Z derived, and I think a lot of the activism itself is also Gen Z derived, of millennial um, uh, corroded and took the form of hipsterism, and gave a sort of pass on activism to some degree, for many excuses. I find that the activism of the Gen Z generation and those younger, is also a part of this access and readiness of the portability of information. And so I guess when I say despair too, I think of it as like there's a despair in seeing even talk about Kierkegaard. Like, I don't mean to take it all the way to like European Christians, but like what Kierkegaard is really talking about in this idea of despair is like the vastness, the infinitude increases in its scale because there is a way in which you know more and then you know nothing, and you know the all of the vast means of communication or the vast means of the world around you, and so there's like almost a sense of being minuscule in comparison to that, that I think that sprouts a despair, even despite of like without a value judgment. It's simply maybe the passage of time allows for a conscious scaling, especially as the resolution, and I mean that in many ways, but the resolution of the capturing media increases. I love the little silences too.
Yeah, I actually, can totally feel like different types of cameras and medias can totally create, different perspective of viewing and shooting and experiencing, right? And especially like recently AI technology, Chat GPT or blah blah, so many stuff coming up, and there are some films are completely created by AI, and so I want to bring up like how to use, because I am also frequently use the 16mm camera, and how to bring this, old media as a new filming language to, connect different kinds of, materials and collage them together. I think is, quite interest thing for me, because if I just follow the trend, then I can't catch up their speed. When I learn the some kind of AI knowledge or stuff, they may come up some new stuff, so it's always for me to hard to catch up them. So I think it's quite important to stick on what you are doing and really feel believe about it. And so right now I think even just in the whole world there are only a few people can understand me, and that's enough. So I can't make everyone to know my work, to my to understand my feelings, but even just one like sincere audience, and I am super happy about that.
I was wondering also that portability or non-portability influences a lot what the atmosphere that can be, that can exist within people working on a film. I was recently on the set of a film that was being shot with very little money on 16 millimeter, and but with some, like, a very small team, a technical team, and basically the more problems, which we didn't have that many problems with the camera, but the more problems we had, the more time for us staying together there was. Whereas with, I don't know, I've been shooting my new film in Venice with my smartphone, and it's just alone time. It's just it's just me and my phone. So I don't know, maybe portability can influence that somehow.
I found portability influenced my practice a lot by a lot of stuff I've not released yet, but to some degree is in a feature film that I've been making for 17 years. That's called Melancholia. And I started making, actually, Bryn, he was around at the beginning of this. So, it's like, it's been a while. But I went through a phase where I would wear a GoPro on my head everywhere. And I just like get an iced tea, the rapper, right? He came up to me because I was like walking and I was like, oh my God, that's iced tea. So I got this weird random moment to like the moment of the absurd. I saw Coco first. So it's like, wait a second. But there's a way that it also antagonized in Brooklyn around 2000. She was 2008 to 2012 was like prime hipster Williamsburg, right? And I remember at that point I did a couple of things as a performance art piece to sort of pierce the social in certain ways. One of them was that, like, this GoPro. The other was the 16 millimeter Bolex too. And I found that the Bolex also, like, actually maybe it sticks around because it still has portability, and it did have portability back then. So it kind of has like this way of being portable despite the fact, right? It's interesting because Super 8's portable, but if we consider portability from maybe another perspective as well, as like portability also including the way in which one can actually convert this into something that is even more portable in a digital sense. The Super 8 actually creates more boundaries still. And so like the 16 millimeter idea as well, like part of the reason why I still shoot 16 millimeter despite the cost is in the sense of its portability, but also in the sense of its condensing and needing to make resourceful of the space that I have for significance. But what does that mean, I guess, in terms of the GoPro, which I would just keep running over and over and over again, and to some degree loses its value. I almost have to go back into it and re-experience the duration of video in a post-production role in order to have the same level of significance that I have towards what's in front of me. Oh, and actually, that's another thing. I just like I'll throw it over to some of you, but like Sophie, like for instance, in your work, there's tons of video footage that you call from. What's your position to the say the brevity of film versus that like long duration of a videotape?
Um, I think the main thing is I need to be aware of what I've showed. So, and it's yeah. So basically, my projects are, I keep shooting. So even sometimes, um, continuously, like for 1 year, for more than a year, but um my mind is always um very aware of what I've showed. So sometimes I just editing in my mind, and I also write a lot. So when I have enough emotions about one kind of a specific topic, or several topics, but I think I can bring them together, then I start to edit in my laptop or in the Premiere, and uh, do some real intense editings, maybe just for 1 week, and then I will have a very draft version about that, and then I will just totally leave for this video footage just for quite a long time, and then back to my computer and start thinking again. So this is kind of my way of thinking. But I also shoot 16 mirror. So when I start to do that, I need to need to um finish thinking about the basic outline of what I want to bring up to the audience and what I want to convey. So the lens, or the kind of the social landscape, will be more specific.
It's very interesting. Is anyone else actually? I'd love to hear about your processes when you approach the shooting, the actual shooting, both uh, Bryn and Stefano, because I feel like you um, are also using different relations to analog, of course, but then the digital. And Bryn, you can also potentially speak to that post-production process of adding the effects, for instance, and what that feels like as the artist approaching the media.
Yeah, I think that for me, because most of what I shoot, like I said, is pretty non-narrative. A lot of it is very nature-based, and so the act of shooting is very meditative. It also does generate a lot of, I mean, just like in terms of duration, right? Some really, really long static shots. And sometimes I am looking for something specific. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes, the camera is set up on a tripod. Sometimes it's handheld. Sometimes I'm up in a tree versus, having just put the camera down and walked away for an hour. And so in terms of the actual process of shooting it, right, I think that there are, for me, various levels of involvement. And I think that, shooting digitally does give me that ability to just, walk away from it, right? Like I don't have to, worry about the fact that okay, the reel's almost up, or even the tape is almost up. Like at this point I can just shoot. But with the editing, it's interesting because it's I'll spend hours and hours and hours just editing a thing, not necessarily knowing what I'm looking for, but usually what I end up with is something that kind of gives me that same sense of it being relatively meditative. One of the things, or one of the artists that I was pretty heavily influenced by when I was younger was this artist named Peter Clow. I remember when we were in class with Lynn Sachs, she had encouraged us to meet up with and interview an artist. And so, I met up with Peter, and, he sent me some of his videos, and he was actually working in a way where he was using a digital camera as sort of an extension of himself, or of his hand. He would enclose himself in these sort of dark, damp spaces with no light, and still the camera would generate some form of imagery. And he likened it at the time to drawing. And so, my approach to the actual image itself, I feel like the portability of the of both the device as well as of the information that is being generated in the process, sort of affords me the ability to really consider the device as an extension of self, as something that is not necessarily outside my body, and to kind of frame the I guess like the end product for lack of a better word, or the end result, as sort of a synthesis between what this object is perceiving, and then the image itself being sort of a result of the synthesis of what has been perceived with what I am imagining, which with editing, I also take a very live approach to that as well, because I'm less concerned with cutting from shot to shot to shot. I'm more focused on, what does X, Y, and Z combination of effects do to the image? What does that do for me in my brain? What electrochemical impulses is it triggering as I'm perceiving this image? And typically, I find that I will know that I'm finished with a work if I am just staring at the same thing without making any sort of changes for just hours. And yeah, so if I've created something that puts me in a trance-like state, I find that I have arrived at a point of success.
Very interesting. And then, Stefano, I was wondering if you could talk about your process, but also then with knowing your process, the way in which that allows you a sort of emotional connection, for instance, to this filmmaker and the plight of this filmmaker too.
Well, it's the link between the archival work and community and my practice is it's sometimes it's very thin, it's very difficult to see, but I want to believe there's a link somehow. But the thing is, I rarely shoot images for the purpose of one project. It's more like a diary, but I'm exaggerating a bit. But the concept behind any moment I'm filming is I'll never be able to use it because it's imperfect. It's made with a smartphone, or the lens is not that clean on the DSLR. So the idea is I'm doing it because I'm here and there's something happening that I like, and it's for me. Then of course everything is stored in hard drives, and to me, making a film or writing a film is editing some footage. So writing the film is editing. It's the same thing for me. So again, it's difficult to explain, but basically I work with my memories, but they're out of context when the film is finished. So they're at the same time my memories and someone else's memories within that unity, that context that the film makes. And I've been trying to, and while processing this type of practice, while growing with this kind of practice, there was some sort of movement, a personal, like existential movement for me, which was from being alone and making films for myself to something else that was like making films so that it can reach someone it can speak to someone else. So, and this movement to me was linked to, of course, the fact that I've always loved to be around artists, around people, but mostly around artists, and around musicians. And the second thing is that music is the link to me that locks everything. And I don't know if it's clear, but it's something something is triggering all this stuff. And it's, of course, it's people, but it's also people like me and artists. And I want to empathize, I think it's the right term in English, by making films that could speak to me, but at the same time they're something else.
Yeah, I think especially so on those two notes too, like we have what Sophie was talking about earlier in the ability to have a sort of empathy through the work that creates a sort of communion with the nondescript or non-segmented spectator spectacle relationship. And in that kind of dynamic, what is revealed is this exuberance of happiness, this exuberance of the understanding of the interiority of another, but it's also of giving the credence to, giving the value to the suffering and the pain and the other forms of maladies that we all face, because those things bring us together into a sort of fabric that, no matter the elasticity of reality or of hyper reality, whatever the context of the nihilism that is put upon the shared reality that, or the ground of the fixed outer, right? It is indeed the philosophy that Sophie was pointing out too, of the there no being no higher being than that which is the reality in front of, being no higher fate, right? Than our own destiny. And in itself is the playing out of an intricate order of time space that either through a media or otherwise we become a conduit for that playing out of things. And so there's almost a secondary and a tertiary playing out of when we begin to be the ones who operate with the camera or through the camera. And in this case too, like right now, through the suspension of sort of cameras, of mediated forms of our communication, of taking the words that we're saying and the significance of what we're saying and transmitting it into electric and electric and digital information in this transmission that's occurring almost simultaneously. We're talking about the portability of time spaces as well. I think that brings me back to that VR idea, is like the portability of a 360 degree space within which we can exist, potentially exist as a full sensory disturbance. And I wouldn't go so far as to say cynically, potentially, that we would exist in as a form of being, as a form of living, but which begins to blur the terms. It's interesting also to see that despite the fact that there's been always this push towards virtual reality as a sort of like ultimate medium. That's why I bring it up, because I find that there is much that potentially experimental film does to heighten this attempt towards, or this push towards, a spectacle that's all encompassing, that can also record to some degree, or to some extent, the interior presence as well. And I found that instead I'm beginning to more see myself in the act of the recording through these media, in what I'm making, from two very, very opposing fields of thought. One of them being the technical information that I've had to memorize, for instance, being the thing or being the conduit for the recording device and or the apparatus of the instrument itself, of trying to sublimate my analytical mind to allow for a sort of memory context to arrive back in me, even when expressing or even when speaking. Sometimes you have to disjoint, let's say, or to separate a particular form of your thinking brain to allow for you to re-explore the conduits of your thought that you may have gone through before, the tangents that you may have expressed previously. In the same way that the film, for instance, has these two different sides of it, that are snaking through or being pulled through the camera, being exposed, becoming a material with the possibility of becoming an illusion to express to others. These kind of considerations, then, though, I think are in direct contradiction to this music that I'm seeking as well. And that music, it seems to just choose you if you deserve it. And I don't know, that sounds potentially weird, new agey, but I found that the times that music within the practice is guiding my thinking, it's because I've come to the practice, come to the point of shooting with all of these um, thoughts, these potentially corrupt thoughts, but conspiracies, preoccupations, understandings of the medium I'm choosing to work within. And then at the same time, it's off as much as I can in relation to the art making, so that any of that was in me before the act of making can attempt to be expressed thoroughly without a direct negotiation from my conscious mind, without attempting to pull back or to allow for some other drive within myself to control the means by which I'm expressing. Um, with that that being said, I do want to say that really quick shout out to Theo Delianis, right? You mentioned before, to Telia Rini. Like, I'm sorry, like I mispronounce everybody's names, but amazing folks too. And Collectation Cinema. I have to put extra good vibes out for those folks. In part because Collectation Cinema, okay, in 2012, Montreal Underground Film Festival and Collectors Zone Cinema, those are the only two places that would show my stuff. It's like after, actually, Bryn. Technically, Bryn showed it first. So I give you. But like, they're the only two places that would really show my stuff and talk about the feeling of being like, nobody, right? And of having no community, of not being able to feel like we're going to reach out. If anything, like I feel like the Gen Z folks have really opened up that too, this like willingness to speak and willingness to take on community as a responsibility of what we do as artists. And I don't know, if anybody has more on that subject too, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I can only say that. Um, well, I'm 35, so people younger than me, and I don't know if it's Gen Z or, but mm, I I have to say that they're more politically conscious, more active, and it's been very interesting interacting with film critics and writers that are younger than me and more open to discuss and live stuff that is more formalist, topics that are more linked to aesthetics, and go deep into what's probably more important, so ethics and community building and things like this. So I mean, not saying that older people are not doing this, but it's refreshing when you go here in Paris, as you probably know. University are constantly being occupied, and so it's refreshing. So
Well, and I think it's I have a couple of thoughts. I think on the one hand, it seems to me like there is a higher level of sort of like political and ethical literacy among younger generations. And I think a lot of that has to do with the rate at which information is exchanged, the extent to which language very quickly solidifies at this point, much more rapidly than when we were, at that age. And then on the other hand, I think that it's interesting because I am not entirely sure. I know that you've discussed TikTok before through this platform, but one of the things that I think is really notable is the way in which, and I think Stefano, this also connects in some ways to how various archives and various sort of moments are presented through different platforms. I think a prime example is how if you look up Paris on Instagram, what you see is very radically different from what you see if you look up Paris on TikTok, right? If you go on Instagram, right, that sort of archive of images, which is, their algorithm is almost entirely, based on sort of, number of likes. You see the Eiffel Tower, you see, somebody's lunch, you see some influencer peddling, the French girl aesthetic. But then if you look at TikTok, you actually see, video after video after video of, these protests, and, you see the extent to which, on fire. And I think that, the algorithms that we're working with have a lot to do with that as well. But that also part of it is that, the platforms that really came about when we were, in our early 20s, themselves have become these corporate beasts that are selling our information globally, and are subjected to a kind of particularly US based control versus the politics around TikTok, and all of the information that we're learning about that, and the ownership hierarchy, the ways in which it is, I don't want to say less censored, but differently censored. And yeah, I feel like at this point I'm rambling, but
No, very good. It's all absolutely true. I think like also there's like so much. So this is my sort of like wake up thought of the day, and it sort of tangentially relates to what you're talking about too. Is thinking about all of these like discrete spots, and I mean like of like hidden, but I also mean that things are obviously also hidden away for particular purposes, whether it's to amplify a sense of power, or whether it's to hide the discrete knowledge. For instance, I was thinking about how children, for instance, have this other form of knowledge, and then one day they're allowed into and it almost seems like a rush of information, but it's also based upon how we perceive time at different points in our age. as we're aging. But there's like a way in which that discrete information passes and becomes awareness in extraordinarily violent terms, sometimes in very radical terms that break our reality of, for lack of better terms, that introduce to us something that feels like becoming aware of hyper reality. But in fact, that actually occurs many different times in our lives and from different vantage points. So I don't know when the next time I will have this sort of existential vertigo is, but I used to call it the numb spiral because I always think that I was always perceive this as being like a consciousness or the understanding of yet another layer of falsehood upon being, and now I'm trying to turn myself into thinking, no, in fact, it might actually reveal to me a discrete space or a discrete set of information that lies beyond what I'm conscious of, and that will propel something forward. For again, for lack of better terms, and to put it into a value in a positive sense, right? So this discrete space, though, it exists as the buildings like in New York City, when you have the sense of vastness when you're in New York City, but you can't enter into all of the spaces, for instance. It's also all of the algorithmic space, the space of what we can't see, of how our information is both taken, distributed, and then also how we don't even have vantage point as to what other people will see based upon their communities or based upon their like way of fabricating a social identity and fabricating a social network around them. There's a discrete space there that we don't see of each other at all, and we just assume that we might see some of the same things, but it's all being controlled, as you're talking about, through a corporate structure, which is also a form of organizing large sets of nothing. And this organization of nothing accounts for a good amount of economy, which is nothing. So, of course, that's to be understood. But this connects back to Sophie. What you were talking about was also that your work looks at dialogues and is also looking at the dialogues that occur through all of the facets, all the layers of dialogues that are occurring. And recently, for me especially, this has become something that I'm more aware of and more interested in exploring, in the sense that people have a way of interacting in small groups or in larger groups to use sets of psychological intonation, like an intonation that obviously will create forms of microaggressions potentially, but also reveal that there is a discrete meaning, yet there's no way to necessarily call somebody out on that which they're expressing. So you're almost powerless to do anything about it, despite the fact that people use language in this way and use even intonation in this way, or facial features, body language, to push outward that which could potentially be, or that is often a sort of psychological game that plays out. And I think that oftentimes we use cinema as a means of exploring how to actually learn that language or utilize it for ourselves, because it's so intrinsic into the art of filmmaking and directing. But yeah.
Yeah, and also I think because the conversations are quite fluid and it could be anything. So, and sometimes you need to, communicate with them. Um, and I think that's the hard part. Because you can't imagine and control the way of the talking. So for the editing part, yeah, like I super like the sentence that you just bring up, like the editing is kind of the meditation, because I think what how to re edit those conversations and give a new logic, the thinking logic to the audience. I think it's quite interesting because that's also shows your thinking in the process of the filming, not just actor like documentation. And like, yeah, so and the conversations, I think another part is um um the conversations are quite like can involved in many aspects and many topics. And so if you make no matter short films or long films, won't bring up all of those talkings, people will feel tiring if you don't have any focus. If the former part or later part didn't have potential connections or obvious connections, um, they don't know what you want to say. Yeah. And but sometimes I don't want to bring the content to deliberate, or I don't want to make kind of slogans or ideas too purposeful. uh, so it's so struggle to uh, connect all these things together and make it in a balanced way for me. Yeah.
I think that this is where we have to head into our last. Everyone's going to give their last thoughts, but and you can talk about anything for your last thoughts. I just think in extension to what you just discussed too, the this extension, right, of language. Um, it's also something where when there is just enough of a space that's created through even just language or even through verbal recognition, that in itself is a medium by which we can do so much to manipulate, that we I mean, of course it's constantly said about cinema, and it's understood about the dimensions of lying that occur within this media. I am thinking about the way in which simply the conversation or simply even the exchange of one piece of information to another can accrue a sort of dimension of space that's so false. And potentially, like all of our talk about portability of technology and the portability of media and whatnot, it's interesting how it still comes back to the very cool media of the word itself, and how that unpackages as a portable concept into a different being. Anyway, I'm gonna pass this off actually to whoever wants to say the next thing. You can talk about whatever you want, but when we come to the last person, what I'm going to have you do is just say bye, and then I'm going to end our broadcast for today. And you can be abrupt. You could just say bye. And who wants the first last word?
I think a lot of what we've been talking about today, I feel like kind of dances around the discrepancy between sort of conveying a thing and receiving or understanding that same thing, um, regardless of what that thing is. And it's interesting because, like, I feel like we've talked about simulation, we've talked about virtuality, and the sort of folding in this idea of like portability or access. A lot of it actually reminds me of sort of like the allegory of the cave. Um, right? This which was Plato, right? And the fact that there was this flame casting shadows onto a wall, and people would either choose to leave the cave or to stay in front of these shadows and sort of maintain this kind of incomplete understanding of the subject. And I think that for me, a lot of what we've been talking about, the thing that excites me most is the idea of being able, or just like having more and more access as time goes on to perspectives and viewpoints and understandings that extend far beyond our own. And the I don't know, I just really hope that we can sort of approach this space of accepting multiplicity, um, and celebrating difference, and understanding that, right, like we're that's part of the condition, right? Like there is that our perspective will always be inherently incomplete regardless of what devices we may have at our disposal that can sort of supplement our understanding of a thing. But that I feel like, to me, what gives me hope is that there seems to be this sort of uninterrupted push from various kind of players or actors, um, to create opportunity for connection.
Absolutely. Sorry, you're hearing fire alarms pass me by. I almost wanted to share the spectacle a little. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of discussions like just within 1 hour and a half, and it's so much going on, and I think we can, you know, think about it for quite a long time afterwards. And I just want thank you guys because you are accompanying me from the night times to the daytime right now. So appreciate and hope we can connect again like quite soon. And bye. Yeah.
Stefano's gonna do one, and then y'all can say bye together. We can all say bye together.
I wanted to say bye.
Don't worry, you get to. Do you have a final word? A final word. Otherwise, we're gonna. Okay, you know what? Then
No?
this is it. On the count of three. Well, let's say okay. Let's aim for three, but I'll give you four. Okay, just because we're everywhere in the world right now. So 1, 2, 3. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.